So here we are in Blender, and Blender is going to act as a bridge between ZBrush and Unreal, and of course the Blender itself is going to be the main DCC app that we use. We do a lot of the modeling, texturing, UVing, and basically a lot of things in Blender. But Blender is so customizable that I found out that we need to review some of the shortcut changes that I've done to make my experience a lot better. Of course, you are free not to use what I'm using, but to make sure that everybody is on the same page, we need to cover them. So the first important add-on that you need to install is this BatchX add-on, which stands for Batch FBX. And you can grab it from this GitHub link. Of course, I have provided the link in a Word file that is in project files that you can go to and simply copy paste the link in here. So what this BatchX add-on does is selecting our object and simply hit export, and it's going to export it to a folder that we assign it to. But first, to install the add-on, you want to come in here in edit mode and go to preferences, and in this add-on menu you simply hit install, and then you refer to the folder that you have installed and copied the add-on to, select it and hit install add-on. So I have installed it, so I'm not going to do anything, but you need to hit install add-on so that it becomes available in here. So what this add-on does is exporting objects to Unreal, and it has some options to help us do the exporting a lot better. But first we need to assign a folder to it, and this is the folder that we are going to use, and then hit accept. So the folder becomes available here, and now what you need to do is hit export. But there are a couple of options that we need to go through. When you create an object and you want to import it into Unreal, in the first place you need to place it in the center of the world, so the pivot is in the center and everything works fine. For example, if we put the object in here and export it to Unreal, the pivot is going to be centered to the world, and it's going to be offsetted from this pivot that we have in the center of the object here. This center transform allows us to bypass the location of the object in current world. And when we export it, it's always going to export it as a center object. So to find out what it does, let's first disable it to see the effect and hit export. And now you see the object has been exported. Let's go to Unreal. And this is the same object that we exported. Let's import it. We don't really want to do anything. We just need to import it, excuse me. And here we go. Let's bring the object in here. And you see the object, you cannot see anything in here. And that's why the object has been placed in here. You see, this is the object and this is the center of the world in Blender. As you see it in here, this is the object and this is the center of the world. But if we enable the center transform, no matter how you place it in the world, it's going to export it always at the 0, 0, 0 in X and Y and Z. So let's go to Unreal and bring the object and hit re-import. And now the pivot has been placed correctly as we wanted. So make sure that the center transform is always on, because a lot of times happens when you have an object somewhere far away from the middle of the world and you want the pivot always to stay at the same place as the object. So one more is the apply transform. And there are a lot of times when you rotate, for example, rotate and do a lot of manipulations in a scale, rotate and anything. If the apply transform is on, it's going to always apply the transform also on these. And you see that because we have scaled the object, rotated and anything, the scale and anything has been ruined and you need to fix it. And one way is to hit apply all, and this one basically does that. It sets everything to default so that the default proportions become all one. And it's good for when you export inside on other applications, the transform and anything will be alright. And this one, material ID, there are a lot of times when you create an object. For example, let me do this and go in here For example, in here, you come in here and select this face and assign a new material to it. For example, making this a new material. And you see by coming to this material section, this object has a couple of materials. Let me change the color on this so that it becomes more prominent. So you see we have a couple of materials on this. If you want to retain both materials, you want to disable this one, because if it's on, it's going to override both materials and make them one. So let's enable one material ID and export it, and again test it in Unreal. As you saw, material had a couple of material, this object had a couple of materials inside Unreal, inside Blender, and when we import it with these conditions in Blender, you see the material has been just resetted to one material. So if your object has multiple materials, you want to disable that. And this resizing you see has happened here is because we have resized the object in Blender, and that doesn't matter really. So another add-on that you can install, of course, it's in Blender by default. And in this add-on section, you come in here and search for Pi, and it's this viewport Pi menus. And if I disable it, you see if I, for example, in here hit Control and A, you see this menu happening in here, which is the menu for Pi transformations that I do. But if you enable it, by hitting Control and A, you are seeing a menu like this, which is a little bit better in working. So enable it, and you are getting a lot of Pi menus in your Blender. The next add-on that you can use is this Maxive interactive tool, which is available in this GitHub link, and it has a lot of functionalities, but the ones that we are going to use the most is this quick pivot and edit pivot, which I have assigned them to a shortcut, Alt S and Shift and Alt and S. And you see now the pivot is in the center of the object. If I select a vertex in here, for example, if I press Alt and S, the pivot now has been placed in here. And if I hit Alt and S again, it's going to center it in the center of the object. So if you hit it in the object mode, it's going to center the pivot on your object. But in edit mode, if you select a vertex, it's going to place it in here. If you select a face, it's going to place in the middle of the face. And if you select an edge and hit Alt and S, it's going to center the pivot on the edge that you have selected. And for that, you need to go to Preferences. In this key map section, you want to select this quick origin, and both in object mode and mesh mode, change the shortcut, because if you change it only in object mode, it's only affecting in the object mode and not affecting an object when it's in mesh mode. And this mesh mode is edit mode, when we go into the mesh itself and are able to manipulate the vertices and faces and etc. But this object mode is when we, for example, are in the viewport and able to select the objects differently. So the mesh mode is in here, and object mode is the whole Blender viewport in here. The next add-on that we're going to install is Text Tools, and has a lot of great features when it comes to UVing. So to download it, you come into this link, and the latest release is in here, and you can download it and install it in Blender. So for install it, again, you go to Preferences, Add-ons, and Install, and select the zip file that you have installed, and then install it. Okay, and then you drag your window out and go into UV mode, into UV editor mode, hit N, and now the text tool is in here, and you can select it, and we can do all sorts of things with it. But this is just to say how we can install it. We use this when we start the UVing process. The next add-on is going to be UV Toolkit, which you can grab from this link that I have provided in here. Simply you can download it from Gumroad. You get the zip file that you want. Of course, that is free. You come into this Preferences and go to Install. and head to the folder that you have downloaded. So this is the UV toolkit. Hit install add-on and you get this add-on that will help us check the checker density. For example, setting the checker density and do some kinds of things that we will see in the UVing section. The next one is Magic UV, which is of course a Blender default. You come in here and search for Magic, and this is Magic UV. It's default in Blender, and you simply activate it and you get it in here. And the next add-on is this UV packer, which is good for packing the UVs in Blender. For example, let's bring it here. It packs the UV with a lot of improved algorithms compared to the Blender default packing system. And to download that, you simply go to this website and go into the Blender section, and in the bottom of the page you find these two links. One is for add-on and one is for the program itself, because it uses an add-on as a bridge to use this exe file to pack the textures for us. First you need to install the add-on, which brings you to this GitHub page. You simply download it from here and close this, and then download program, and it will download the zip for you. And this is what you get. One is the add-on itself, and what is the program. You need to unzip the program and you get this, which is the exe file. So to make it work, you need to again come in here and install, and you need to install the add-on, not the program. So you install it and then you get this, which is the UV packer. And to activate it, you need to hit this pack button, and it requires you something. So I've done that in here. We are not able to do it in here. Let's try it on an older Blender installation. So in here, when you hit pack, it's going to require you to copy the exe file to this direction that it has allowed you. In here, copy these and paste them in the folder that it has told you to. So I copied it for the 2.93 version that I have. And now if you hit pack, it's going to pack perfectly for you. And it's going to use the 0 to 1 UV space to pack as efficiently as possible. So the next add-on that we're going to install is the Material Utilities add-on. And this is the link. You copy it and open in your browser, and you will be faced with such a screen. And you simply click on here and download the zip and wait for the zip file to be downloaded, and then go to Blender. And in here, preferences, again install add-on, head over to the download folder, Material Utilities Master, and you install it. Okay, we've installed that, and let's find it. Material Utilities, and the shortcut for that is the Shift plus Q. You hit it, and then in here you can do all sorts of material customizations in here. For example, adding a new material. Let's call this one 01. Okay, and then in here you see the material has happened there. Let's say that we want to assign a new material to this 02, and then this does what we can do basically in here. It can do a lot of things. For example, let's copy this sometime and give these different materials, and now let's give this, and now let's say that we want to select every object in the scene that has the material 02 in it. So we shift click on here and select by material 02, and these two have been using this 02, which is right, and these two are using 01. So this is a great add-on. Invest in it, install it. It's free to see what is going on and what you can do about it. And the next add-on is this Machine Tools, which you can download from the link. It's free. You basically put 0 in here and import your email, and then you will be able to download it from here. And this is the latest release. You download the zip and install it as we have installed the previous ones. And it has some great functionalities, but we are not going to be using this as much in the tutorial. But let's see some of its functionalities. Let's go to Edit, Preferences, and in here, search for Machine Tools. And in here, you can do all sorts of configurations with it. It has a lot of menus and a lot of perfect things that you can use. For example, one that I use quite often is this shading pie. And in that, I have configured the key to be Shift and a space bar. And if I hit Shift and a space bar, we get this shading pie in here, which has a lot of configurations. For example, if we want to check for the face normals to see if they are working or not, or if we want to set it to material, rendered, wireframe, or solid, or basically whatever you want to do with it. And one good one is shade smooth, which basically shades the whole thing as a smooth, and one is assigning a degree for a smoothing, for example, for something, a hard surface. And this basically does what this one does in here. You really do not have to come in here and shade smooth and correct the normals, but you basically come in here and select what you want. And another great pie that it has that is very useful is this transform pie, which you can spawn it by Control Alt and Q. Of course, you can change the shortcut if you want. If I press Control Alt and Q, I get a lot of transform options. For example, setting the pivot point to be the bounding box center on the 3D cursor or anything, or setting the transformation to global, local, or anything in that nature. And that is very useful. For example, now the pivot is on the global, which means the pivot is going to stay the same always in this direction. So let's say that rotate this a bit and want to make the pivot go to this direction that this one is facing. We just simply go in here and select the local mode. And now you see the pivot now is facing where the object is facing. And that's a great option to use. And another one is the cursor pie, which I have assigned it to Shift and S. And we will use it pretty much in this course very much because, for example, let's create a default cube and create another cube. And let's say that we want to make the cube on these the same. Excuse me, make the pivot. You see the pivot are different in here. So let's delete this, copy this. Excuse me. And select here and put the pivot in here. And you see one pivot is in here. There we have two couple of boxes. One is in here and one is in here. I want this pivot to be the same pivot as this one. And for that, I'm going to select this, which has the pivot, and I'm going to Shift S and bring the pivot to origin, because this is now on the origin. But let's say that these are offsetted from the origin. So now I select it, Shift S, and bring the center to selected. Now the origin has been selected in here, and we can do all sorts of things, and one of them is pivot correction. And I set the cube that is not origin. You see there's a small dot in here which indicates that the pivot is in here, and a small dot in here goes in here, and this is the one that we have offsetted the pivot on. So I select it and you Shift S and pivot to cursor. And now let's make the pivot to origin again, and now both of them are sharing the same pivot, and the pivot on them is the same. And one thing else you can do is Shift S and bring origin to selected, and now the origin has been brought up into here, and you can spawn things in the center of this object. For example, let's bring a cylinder, and the cylinder has been spawned in the center of this one. For example, if we want to add it into here, do bevels and do all kinds of things. And let's see that, for example, we want to duplicate this around. So we select it, and now the pivot you see is in the center of this, but now pivot is showing in here. You shouldn't be fooled by that. We select it, we select this, and now we are seeing the pivot, and hit Shift S and origin to cursor in here, and now go to top and Shift D, bring it in here. And you can do things like this with it, and it's a perfect add-on. You should invest in it and see what works and what not. And the next add-on is one of the most useful ones, and this is the modular tree add-on. So you copy the link and you will be faced with this, and there's a documentation in here, and you want to go into the latest release, and the latest release is now 4.0.2, and you download the Windows one, and again go in here, go to preference, install, and go to the directory that you have put the folder in, and this is modular tree, and you hit install add-on, and I have installed it before and it's giving me an error, but that is not a problem. We can fix it because I have downloaded the add-on right now. Okay, let's open a viewport, and in this menu there's an M3 that you can open. So let's hit new, and now we have some options that we can choose from by hitting Shift and A. So Shift A, the first one that you grab should be this tree measure, and this is the base for our tree. And let's add a trunk and hit generate tree, and now it generates a tree based on the procedural values that we input in here. So again, let's go Shift A, branch, bring a branch, and you hit generate, and it becomes available for you. And this is really procedural and non-destructive, and you can do a lot of things with it. And then the great thing is that it's a free add-on that you can invest in. So let's see what we can do with this add-on. And there's a great option in here, add leaves. If you add a leaf, it's going to create a leaf for you, a leaf texture for you, and you can do all sorts of things with it, and even changing it for something else. For example, let's bring a default cube, excuse me, let's bring a default cube, and we want to connect these two together. Everything you want to do should be connected to this. So select this and this one, join them, and let's go see what has happened on the tree. And you see that the default cube has been spawned in here. And if you want to use only that default cube, you come in here, select this, invert it, and now go to the tree, and now the default cube has been spawned all over the place, and you can use this as a leaves or as anything that you want. So the first option that we can use is the length, and it's basically the length of the tree. Let's remove these so that we can use and see what is going on here. And this seed is when you create the tree, you duplicate it around and use the seed to randomize and create new things. And the length is basically the length of the tree, and this randomness is basically how random noise it adds to the tree. And this resolution is the resolution that it adds to the tree. You see in here, just look at the phase count. See the phase count being added or decreased. And this attraction is something like gravity, but in a reversed manner. If you start to decrease it, the tree is going to fall down, and if you increase it, the tree is going to be attracted to the sky. And the shape is going to be how thick and thin the shape is, and this start radius is defining the start radius, the radius of the starting point of the tree. For example, let's increase it, and then the end radius is going to define how the end is going to be, how thick or thin the end cap is going to be. Let's increase it, and the sky is the limit on how far you can go with this add-on. It's an amazing add-on, and try to use it. And let's, after this, you should have basically an understanding of how the tree is going to be, and then you're good to go. If you have a little bit of knowledge about the trees, not academic on knowledge, but something that works. So let's bring branches, and you can change something in here, or hit generate tree, it will update it. So this is the tree. On the branches there's this start, which defines the starting point based on the trunk that we have. For example, if we put it to 0.5, the starting point is going to be halfway up. So the end point is the last point on which the branches are going to be. For example, we have set the start to 5, and let's set the end to 0.6. You see, now we have clamped the branches to be only on these parts. Length basically is going to define the length of the branches. Let's make it a little bit more interesting. Not 1, and this one to 0.9. Okay, and now the length is that. Branch density is the amount of the branches that it's going to add. If you hit 0, it's going to be minimum, and the more you go up, the more branches it's going to add. But the resolution also is going to increase. And a starting angle, you see the angle that it starts. Now it's 45. You can manipulate the starting angle to be changed. And you are not bound to only using this single value for all of them. You can do a lot of things. For example, let's hit Shift and A, and in this property, bring a random value, and plug this random value in the starting angle. So for the mean, I'm going to put it to 45, and for the max, I'm going to put it to 90. And now you see in the beginning, the starting point is 45 degrees, and in the last branches, the angle is, you see in here, the angle is perpendicular, perfect, 90 degrees. And I can set it, for example, something like 50 to create this effect. And you can use this random value also to randomize things that you have in here. And this randomness, basically what does the name suggest, adding a lot of randomness to the branches. And I suggest you always use any randomness that you see in procedural programs. And this break chance, let me put this onto 45 and hit generate tree to update. Okay, now the angle is 45 all along. We can visualize this a lot better. And this break chance is the chance of how many branches get broken in the beginning. And if you increase the chance, you're getting a lot of broken branches. That's pretty self-explanatory. And this resolution is also how much resolution we are going to use. And this flatness makes it perfect procedural. And I encourage you not to use this that much, because we always want a lot of imperfection, of course, and especially if the case is a tree, that is perfect natural thing. So let's bring this break chance down to something more reasonable. For example, 0.2, and now you see the combination of perfect branches and broken branches. And then we have the resolution, which is self-explanatory, and then a start radius defines how thick the starting points of the branches are. And if you start to increase it, you're getting basically something like this, thicker branches. And this up attraction is what we covered later before that. If you start to increase, the branches are going to point towards the sky. And this gravity strength is basically the opposite of that. If you start to increase it, you're adding a lot more gravity to the branches. The next one is a stiffness, and that is self-explanatory. And this is a tricky one, a split. If you zoom on the branches, you see the branches start to split from a point. And this is what happens in nature. If you don't want that, you can disable it so that we only have single branches with no split. And if you start to increase the split, you're getting a lot of more branches. And be aware that the resolution also is going to rise, and you might encounter something like this, which is pretty unnatural. So let's disable it. And this phyllotaxis, let's look at it from the top view and increase a bit of a split. And this phyllotaxis starts to rotate these randomly to create this phyllotaxis effect. And this split radius and a split angle are based on this one, and you define on how much radius the split happens or on what angle. So this is about it. I believe we have covered the most important Blender add-ons that we use. Of course, I have tried to cover the major ones, not those things that you are familiar with. And now we're going to jump into ZBrush and explore the user interface of ZBrush. And here we are in ZBrush finally. And you can drag a tool, for example, a plane 3D, drag it, and you simply hit edit and go in here. And to make sure that everything is showing up in here, you need to make it a Polymesh 3D if it's a default thing that you grab from ZBrush. But if it's something that you import from Blender, no need to do that. In fact, let's take this default cube and we're going to import this into ZBrush and demo it. So select it, and I prefer always to export my objects as FBX because it's easier and it's consistent all across. So you want to select limit to selected objects so that it only exports this, not anything in the scene. For example, if there are multiple objects in the scene and you want to export this one, you want to limit it to the selected objects using this. And for the rest, you're ready to go. And you can also do apply transformations, but on most cases, it really doesn't matter. And let's name it 01 and hit export FBX. And then you need to go into ZBrush, and of course your ZBrush might not be so configured. These are the things that I use the most, so I have dragged them into the layout and UI so that I can access them a little bit easier and faster. And we will learn how to do this just in a minute. So there are multiple ways of importing things from outside ZBrush, and one of them is this import 3D mesh, and then select it. Hit open, and we really do not care about these now. Let's hit import, and now the file has been imported perfectly, and now we are in edit mode. And if you are not in edit mode, you simply click on it and you go into edit mode. And now you see the poly count here is only 8, and this is not good for sculpting things in ZBrush. And if I start to sculpt, you see nothing is happening in here because the poly count is very low. And to remedy that, you could use Dynamesh or use subdivisions. To subdivide your mesh, you go to the geometry tab, and in here there's a divide button. And if you hit divide, it's going to divide, but it's going to also smooth the surface for you. And if your case is a hard surface, you really do not want that. If you want the object to stay in the same proportions and not change anything in the size, you only hit disable this one and hit divide as many times as you want. And now our objects has been fairly divided, and now we are able to sculpt on this. And one way to add resolution to this is using the Dynamesh. Let's go lower and delete any higher so that we have locked the subdivisions. And for Dynamesh, you also need to go to the Geometry tab, and in here, the Dynamesh tab, you press Dynamesh. But if you want to drag this into the scene, what do? You go into Preferences and into Config and enable customization. And now you are able to drag whatever you see in here into the layout. For example, I use this higher res as an example. You control an alt and drag this into the layout to whatever you want, to wherever you want. And if you're happy with the layout, you come in here, disable this, enable customization, and start config, store config. You store, and it tells you that the next time you open ZBrush, it's going to use the same layout for you. And if you want to export your config, you simply save UI and save the UI to your hard drive if you want to access it later on. And if you want to erase something from this, you go to that element that you do not need, again hold Control and Alt and drag it into the viewport so that it's gone. Now the things that I'm using are these masking options and some UV options and deformations and delete, duplicate, split, divide, and Dynamesh, and we will be covering them later on. But for now, we're going to do Dynamesh. So let's disable customization and store the config. So because I have dragged the Dynamesh into here, I'm working in here and totally ignoring this geometry tab. So for Dynamesh, you need a couple of things. One is resolution, which is of course available in here, which I have dragged in here, Dynamesh and these options. And if you want to unblur it, you simply disable the blur because the blur smooths the mesh just a bit. And the next important thing is this resolution. For example, let's put it to 256 and hit Dynamesh, and now you see the resolution has been up quite much, and you see a lot of detailing happening in here. And this resolution and Dynamesh are really dependent on the size of the mesh. For example, if I enlarge this mesh and on the same resolution, I'm going to get more poly counts. So one thing to have in mind is that the size of the mesh is going to be affecting on how much polygons you are going to get. And let's see that we have sculpted on this and we're happy with it. So let's set it to be 512. And if you want to change your Dynamesh to be affected on this, you control and drag left mouse click in the viewport, and it's going to update and show the updated poly counts for you. And it's going to Dynamesh again for you on the higher resolution. And if it didn't, you are going to smooth the surface just a bit and control and drag. And now you see that it has applied the Dynamesh for us. So let's say that we are going to use this as a nanite mesh. You see the poly count is very high, and we're going to import this into ZBrush. First, I'm going to detail it a little bit, just a little bit, with these brushes that we have here. And if you want your brush to only affect the front size, there's an option in here called in the auto masking, it's called the back face mask. If you enable the back face mask, it's not going to affect the other part if your mesh is too small. For example, let's drag something bigger, and now you see, although we have not applied anything in here, this has affected this side as well. So if you want to prevent that from happening, you go into brush, and in here you want to enable back face masking. And of course, I have drag the back face masking in here because I use that a lot. So let's do the same operation again, and let's look at the back side. It's untouched because of this option. And let's do that again without this. You see the effect that is happening in here. So let's detail this just a little bit so that we have something to decimate. So let's say that we are happy with this and we're going to import this as a nanite mesh into Unreal Engine. What you can do is, if you are unlimited on resources, for example, if you have a lot of RAMs and CPU, SSD and things, you want to export this as is in Unreal Engine. It's not a problem, but I'm a little bit limited on resources and I'm recording at the same time as well. So I'm going to decimate this to a reasonable number so that then I can export it to Unreal Engine. So let's come in here in this Z plugin. And if you do not have this menu in here, if that is like this, you want to use this option and drag it out so that it becomes available. And if you do not have the Z plugin also, you can come in here, Z plugin, and drag it into here so that you have the plugins in here. So in the Z plugins, there's an option called, let me drag this to somewhere else, Z plugin, and drag it in here. So in the Z plugin, there's a plugin called Decimation Master. And this Decimation Master is perfect for reducing the amount of polygon without losing so much quality. So let's smooth this a bit. And what this Decimation Master does, if you look at the wireframe in here, it's going to keep the wireframe on places that are affected the most and leave those to be, and only decimate on the parts that are not affected so much. For example, parts like in this area that is somehow untouched. It's going to reduce the poly count from these areas and leave these areas that are very touched the most. So for that, you want to first pre-process the currents. It's going to take this subtool, and these are called subtools in ZBrush. It's going to take a little bit of time depending on the size of poly counts, and it's going to pre-process. And now we have a couple of options to do. One is decimate on the percentage of the value that we give it in here, and one is using these presets even without pre-process. These are separated. These presets do the both things that we're going to do at the same time. It's going to pre-process and then it's going to decimate it to the number that we give it here. So we have pre-processed it, and let's say that we're going to keep only the 20% of the poly count. So you hit decimate current and it's going to take a little bit of time, and you see it has reduced the poly count so high, and keeping only 20% of the polygons without any quality touch, you see. And now if you go to wireframe mode, you see the poly count has been reduced dramatically, and we are keeping the poly count number without losing any quality, but the poly count is now a lot more manageable, and we can simply export this into Unreal and start to use that. And there are times that we are not only exporting these high quality meshes into Unreal, but we are not UVing them as well. And it might happen a lot of times which we really do not create UV and export this directly into Unreal and start texturing there using the vertex color data. Vertex color can store RGB as well. So we are going to use RGB, which stands for red, green, and blue, and assign each vertex a color so that later on we can apply the textures in Unreal Engine using vertexes, not the UVs. And for that, we're going to be using the polypaint in ZBrush. And this polypaint either could be manual or it could be automated. So we are going to do the automated because it's a lot faster and more accurate. So for activating the polypaint, you come in here go to polypaint in here and affect the colorize. So we need to give this a default color, because if we start to change any color on here, it's going to be the default. So let's come in here first. Without colorize, if we start to change this, I meant this. Without colorize, if you start to change, you are basically changing the color. But if we start the colorize, we need to give this a color. So in this color menu, let me drag it in here. For the default color, I'm going to give it red. And we have a RGB in here. And by red, I mean the pure red, which is full red, no green and no blue. So you hit fill object, and now our object has been filled with red. So when we import it into Unreal, we are telling the shader to apply that material, for example, a wood material, on red vertices. And we are using those world space materials on this to create a texture that is tiling all across and without UVs as well. So let's say that we want to apply some dirts on green channel. We bring the red down and we want to use masking for this. And the masking in ZBrush is very powerful. For example, you go to masking and in cavity, you start to mask the cavity. So now it's not very powerful. Let's increase the amount and mask cavity again. It's going to take a little bit of time. And we need to increase it even more to get something better. So now it has masked the cavity for us. So we need to invert the mask, because it's only going to affect the unmasked parts. So Control and Control and left click on the screen to invert the mask, and in here make the green full and hit fill object. And now these cavity parts have been selected. And this is not a real mesh. If we then later on start to bring more sophisticated meshes, this masking would be a lot more efficient and powerful. But to demo that, it's fine. And now in Unreal Engine, on the green vertices, it's going to assign a new material. And to select some edges, we go to smoothness. And I start masking by a smoothness. And it's going to select these masked parts for us, these edge parts for us. And to affect this, we are going to hit Control and left click in the screen to invert the mask. And these options are good for affecting the mask, and you see they are in here, and I've dragged them into the viewport so that I can access them a lot better, even without opening this masking. So this grow mask basically grows the mask. Of course, to see the effect, we need to make this a real mask, not inverted mask. And to grow the mask, it's going to grow the mask basically. And by shrinking, you're going to take away from the mask, and by sharpening, you are sharpening the mask, and by blur mask, you are blurring the mask. And these are options that will help you have a better transition. So in Unreal, we want to tell the shader to put some edge damage on the blue vertices. So we invert the mask and bring the green down. You want to make sure that these are fully down, because it's mathematical, it's on or off. If you, for example, drag the blue all the way out and increase a little bit of green, you're getting a new color. So we want to make sure that these are all perfect 0 and 1. So you then hit fill object, and it's going to assign that blue color on the edge parts. And when we import this into Unreal, you can fill and imagine that the main texture is going to be on the red parts, the edge damage is going to be on blue, and some cavity damages is going to be in green. And later on, we will create sophisticated examples using this approach. And if you create vertex color data in here, which is in the form of polypaint, and you want to then decimate it and import it into Unreal Engine, you should have in mind that if you start to decimate it, it's going to lose any information that you have in here. And to keep that data, you want to come into this decimation and use and keep polypaint. If you enable this and then pre-process and then decimate again, now it has kept the polypaint and vertex color data for us. You see, although the poly count has been reduced dramatically, the result is going to stay the same. And when you are going to export this to Unreal, you either can export it using these exports, or you can come down in here and there's a plugin called FBX export that has a lot of options. The first one being all visible or selected. And this is related to the subtool. If you have multiple subtools, for example, you have a lot of different subtools in your menu, and if you want to only export this, you are going to export selected. Or if you want to export these all, suppose that these are three different meshes. If you want to export them all, you hit all, and if you are going to export only visible ones, you hit visible. And this visibility options helps you in here. And now we have a couple of subtools which we can export using these options. But now we are going to use only selected, which is this one, which has been selected using this color that you see here. And for the version, you simply put it in here and you want to set it to binary. And then you want to hit triangulation on, and this triangulates the mesh for you, and then you can export that. So as for options, we really do not have anything to say. So let's hit export, and in here let's hit a name for it and hit save. And now it's going to export it for you on an FBX file, which you can import into Blender or directly import to ZBrush, into Unreal, to be used as a nanite mesh. So let's say that we are going to import it for some last minute touches into Blender. Go to import, and then we can grab this and import it into Blender. And since it's going to be a little bit heavy, it's going to take a couple of seconds for importing. And now we have that in here. Perfectly fine. And if you want to see if the vertex color data works or not, you'll simply go into solid mode, and in here in this viewport shading, you want to come into color and hit vertex. And this is the vertex color data that we created inside ZBrush. And now from now on, we can really export this into Unreal. So let's take this and export it. And I always prefer to bring the mesh into Blender and then export it from Blender so that I can change the names. For example, let's name it to a static mesh. Always when I'm creating meshes, I'm going to call them a static mesh, sm underscore nanite underscore test. So the pivot is working. The material, if you want to change the name of the material, for example, let's call it nanite, and this is going to show in Unreal Engine as nanite, or in Substance Painter, or anywhere you export it. So let's hit it, export, and in here I'm going to call it static mesh underscore nanite underscore test. So export FBX is going to take a little bit of time, and I've exported with the same that I exported on ZBrush, and now it exported. And now I believe we have covered the most basic things about the ZBrush and content creation inside ZBrush. And later on, when we start the sculpting process, we will explain about the brushes and things, and I feel like that we will have a better time there instead of now starting to sculpt. So I can safely close ZBrush and go to Unreal. And now we are in Unreal and we're ready to export that mesh into here. So let's go to my meshes folder. And I'm going to import it in here. We use the same method for importing anything into Unreal. and this is our mesh. Let's hit import. And now you have a couple of options. One is importing into Unreal and then later on making it a nanite mesh or making it a nanite mesh in the same place. So I want to do the same. I want to make it a nanite mesh in here, and there are some more things that you need to do. First is expanding this rather. And for nanite, because we are going to be using Lumen, we really do not need to generate light maps. So we're going to turn this off. And then there's one more thing that you can do is about the vertex color. If you set it to ignore, it's going to ignore any vertex color that you have created, which we don't want. So we're gonna set the vertex color import option to replace. So it's going to replace the vertex color with the default one for us, which is what we want. It's going to contain the vertex color. So you hit import, and now it's going to import the mesh at the same time converting it into a nanite. And now the mesh have been imported, and let's import it in here. And you see the mesh have been imported with all of the detail that we created inside ZBrush. And this really pushes the content creation further. And you see the name is working all right, and the material name is nanite. Perfect. And let's assign that world space material that we created before to see how it's working. So material debug and this world space. And it converted into black because nanite currently doesn't support the two-sided material. And you see this is a tree material that in here we enable two-sided. Let's disable this two-sided for now. Nanite isn't accepting the two-sided material right now. They might change it in future, but for now it's not accepting. So let's give it a little bit of time to calculate. And now you see, although we have not created any UV, we are getting the texture that is perfectly matching the proportions of the object. So if you start to resize and anything like that, it's going to be the same. So let's create a material that shows how to use these vertex color materials on this. So let's create first in here, make it two-sided so that the trees in our level stay consistent and two-sided. And as the result, you see this convert to a black material. So let's set it to be default and create a new material and call it VC for vertex color for now. So on VC, we are going to create the vertex color data, which in Unreal Engine, you can simply right click and hit enter vertex and it brings the vertex color. And now we have these options to choose from. We are going to choose from either red, green, and blue, which we assigned before that into ZBrush. So let's create a constant color and make it red. You can choose create any material, even material layers and material functions, which we will cover later on. But for now, we are going to use simple colors. So let's make it pure red. It's okay. And now we are going to use this as a mask. So I'm going to copy this and use a lerp. And this lerp basically uses an alpha. I'm going to put the red into alpha, which is a mask, and it's going to blend between A and B based on the alpha. So if we now start to assign A and B into here, it's going to look at the vertex color, and wherever the vertex color is red, it's going to show B for us. And I've purposefully put this into here into A so that there's something, but you can safely set it to black. So we're going to use the red vertex color as a mask, and A in here means 0 and B means 1. A means no, B means yes. So logically we are going to tell it, hey, use the vertex color where it's red put the B, show the B for us. So I'm going to copy the lerp again, and this time put the result of the previous lerp into A, and now we're going to use the green as a mask. And let's in here again assign this, and for visualization colors, let's drag the red down and bring the green up, and now it's going to use the green as a mask, and wherever it's green it's going to show B, and wherever it's not green it's going to show the previous ones, which uses this as an overlay effect. So again, let's copy this and bring the lerp into A, and now we're going to use blue. So we bring the blue into alpha, which is the mask. Let's make it pure green instead of having some irregularities. So red down, green down, blue up. And now put the blue in here, and let's put it into base color. And using this one, you're going to see something that we created inside ZBrush before. So let's assign this into here, and now you see we are seeing that thing that we created in ZBrush, perfect and without any irregularities, and it's working all right. And now in Unreal Engine, instead of using these primitive colors, we can use material functions. For example, create a full tiling wood material or a tiling brick, which we will create later on, or whatever you want, and place them and create shaders with them instead of using only base color. And we'll create shaders based on this method later on, but this is only for a demo on how we can use nanite technology for us. Of course, we will create nanite meshes that are UV'd, but this one is a method, the hardest one. And if you are able to do something like this, you will be able to do a lot of nanite meshes as well. So as for Unreal Engine, this is it. We will talk about Lumen later on when we start to light the scene. And now let's go to Gaia, the free landscape authoring tool. And to download Gaia, you come into quadspinner.com, the website of the company that provides this software, and hit download. And the good thing about Gaia is that it has a free community edition which you can use commercially. So you hit download setup and it's going to download the zip. And to see the comparison between the versions, you go to buy and see full comparison in here. And there's a community edition which is free and you can use that. Of course you can buy, but the free edition is in here. But the bad thing is that the export resolution is bound to 1K and you cannot go beyond that. And if you go beyond that, you're going to get artifacts in the terrain that you create. So in here, in the commercial use, it says yes, which means that you can use this free edition for commercial purposes. So after you download and install, you are going to get something like this. And right away, if you are experiencing a little bit of lags in viewports, you're going to come in here and put the resolution to 0.5. And this resolution is for viewports, and you can change that later on if you want. So in here, there's a node-based software that we can create a lot of awesome trains. If you click on this 3D viewport here, using the WASD, you're able to move into the train and see it from as many sides as you want. And for rotating around the landscape, you hold down Alt to assign a pivot, and you rotate around the landscape without any problem. And to zoom on the landscape, you either zoom with mouse or alt click and mouse middle click hold, drag front and back to zoom out and in. And using shift and middle click, you're able to pan around the train to see what it goes. And this software is node-based, just like Substance Designer, Unreal Engine Material System. It's based on nodes, and you drag something from here and start to manipulate and do changes, and you will see the result as you go. So to view any node, you click on it and you see the effect of that node happening there. And this is our primitive mountain, and this is after the erosion being happened. But if you want to lock on a specific node, for example, on erosion, you right click on it and hit pin, and the shortcut is F. So select it and hit F, and now you're only visiting the result of the erosion. No matter how you click, where you click, or even bring anything, you're going to only see the result of this erosion. And let's plug this into here, and now you see we are seeing this gradient. Let me unpin this. We have this gradient in here and being affected by erosion. So this is how you create landscapes inside Gaia. You'll get something from these, exactly from primitives. For example, let's bring a Perlin noise, which is something like this, and bring it through erosion, or mix it with something. You will get the results pretty fast. And let's see this erosion, and after the erosion has been applied, you see it's taking shape. So let's look at it. And for erosion, if you want to change something, there are nodes which are a little bit heavier than the rest. For example, the erosion is one of them. If you want to change something, you need to hit apply changes. And if you want to change on the fly, you need to hit lock button on the apply, and then the effect of erosion becomes available just only a single click. And the idea is basically grabbing something from this menu and start to manipulate it to get something that you want. For example, this is a sand. Let's visualize it. You see this sand dune effect happening in here, and you bring it through erosion and get something that you want. Or, for example, mixing this sand with mountain, or mixing things together. And to mix them, there's a node called, you right click and write combine. And this combine node takes two outputs and gives you the results. So for example, I want to bring this gradient on top and this mountain on here. And now you see it has created a gradient mountain for us. And there are some blending modes in the combine, which you can, of course, take advantage of. One is the ratio. If you drag it onto right, you're getting this. You're getting the second output. And if you drag the ratio all the way to here, you're getting the first input. So let's go for something in here. And of course, you can use these blending modes, which you are familiar with from the Photoshop or Substance, to create the node. And let's plug it to erosion. And this is what you get. And basically, this software has been composed of multiple parts. One is this graph, one is the 3D viewport. Of course, you can bring the 2D viewports as well, in case, for example, you want to create an island. You want to create something and paint it instead of using this primitive. So you go in here and search for mask and bring the mask. And this mask, if you select it, it's going to say edit mask. So you paint something in here, just everything you want. It doesn't really matter. It's based on black and white data, just like any other procedural application, for example, like Substance. And instead of combine, let's drag this erosion in here and hit F to isolate this. So we're going to use this mask and drag it into the mask input that most of the nodes in here have. So let's drag the mask to see the effects. And you see it has selected that mask part that we painted. If we go into here and paint the mask, you see this is the mask that we painted, and it's on the white parts, it's showing the mountain, and on the black parts, it's hiding it. And it's basically very good for things that you are going to create. And these are nodes that you can go and invest your time in to see what they do. And let's say that we're happy with the landscape that we have created and we want to texture it. So first thing that you need to do is selecting this and pin as underlay. And if let's see if we do not pin as underlay, we drag it out and we select a texture node. And if we unpin this and start to visualize the texture, this texture node is good for texturing the object, the landscape that we create here. You see now it has become a flat surface. And if you want to see the result on the landscape that we created, you need to select this and hit pin as underlay. So whenever you try to visualize the texture, it's always showing this last layer of the landscape in underneath it so that you can see the effect, pretty much what is going on. So after the texture, you can go and bring sat maps. And these are maps that are scanned from satellite data that you can use in any situation that you want. For example, if you want this to be a grassy, you go to green and select the color palette that you want to texture the landscape. And if you want this, for example, to be rocky, you go into this color palettes that have been extracted from satellite data and choose one that works best for you. For example, if you want to create something alienish or something like a Mars or everything you can create with this. So this is the basics for this. You can go and check and see what of these nodes do. But of course, this is not a landscape creation course, and we are not going to go pretty deep into landscape creation. We are only checking the possibilities. So I believe the user interface lesson has come to an end. Of course, there's Substance Designer and Painter left, which I have decided not to cover on this course because we're going to use the vanilla software and not use any plugins or add-ons. And later on, when we start texturing, we'll discover the softwares as well. So see you in the next session.